Correcting students who give wrong answers. So we use questioning in class because it's a great technique to use to find out, do the students understand what we're talking about? What are misconceptions that they might have that they brought with them into class? And it's a good way to keep the students engaged, making sure they're paying attention to what we're talking about and clarifying things that they're not understanding. When we're learning, we need to take in new information. We need to think about how that relates to what we already have in our heads. And so students are going to come in as learners with a lot of personal experience and personal beliefs, some of which may lead them to give us incorrect answers. And we need to make sure that we correct it when a student gives an incorrect answer in class, because everybody needs to know that that was an incorrect response. They need to know what the correct response is, and everybody benefits from hearing us give good feedback. We all should be practicing all the time giving appropriate feedback. And so if you do this well, it shouldn't be shaming for the person who asked the question and should be an enriching thing that helps everybody in the class better understand how to correct someone when they make a mistake and what the correction is for this specific question at this time. So it's really about the whole class, and it's important that you not make it about the single person. So if a person has asked you a question and their response was incorrect, don't stand there and stare right at them and talk back to them as you correct it. Move it out to the whole class. Oh, that's a common misconception that I've heard about. Let's talk about that for a minute. And don't focus it so much on that individual person. We don't ever want students to feel like if they answer something in your class and they're wrong, they're going to be shamed for it. That will really shut them down from answering questions. So you really want to do everything you can to make this a positive experience for everyone involved. Sometimes the answers that you get are not totally wrong. So not all wrong answers are totally wrong. So let's say they say something, but it isn't really what you asked about. And so there you may just need to rephrase the question. And I usually am very overt about that. I think maybe I'm not asking the question to help you get at what I want. Let me try it again. And so that sort of takes the burden off the person who answered and puts the burden on me. I didn't ask the question in a good way. Sometimes the student is close. They've got some good information, but either they've left something out or part of what they've said is correct and part of it isn't correct. And so with that, you need to verify what was correct and then sort of embroider on that. And so the example I give here is saying, let's say I had asked about why dogs with pyometria get PUPD, and the person answers and tells me that E. coli is the most common organism. My response would be, you are right. That's absolutely right. E. coli is the most common organism. So what is the link then? What does the dog being full of E. coli have to do with the dog becoming PUPD? So helping them see where they're right and leading them along the path to help them reach the more complete answer. Sometimes the student replies with a common misconception. This is something they absolutely learned in another class or a paper that they read. And this is a great learning opportunity for the class. I actually really like it when students do this because then it gives you that opportunity to say, you know, I have heard that before, and here's what I know about where that came from. And so maybe talk about where it arose from and why people might believe it. And that way, again, you're not shaming the person. It's what they learned, it's what they learned, but helping them understand, yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people think that, but here's the understanding that we have now. Here's new information we have, or things of that nature. Sometimes the answer is really wrong, and sometimes it's really, really wrong. And then it's important for you to not make it clear to the whole room that you've just heard what you believe is a ridiculous answer to that question. You never want to laugh at a student. You certainly never want to give any body language that shows that you think you've just heard a really ridiculous answer. So you just need to be kind of calm. And the one thing you should never say is the word good. Because if it's wrong, and it's really, really wrong, you never want to give anyone in that room the impression that it was good. You need to somehow tell them that their answer is wrong. And how you tell them it was wrong is going to depend on why it's wrong. So first of all, if the answer is totally wrong, you might just say something like, thank you for answering the question, but that's not what I was looking for. That's not right. That's interesting, but that's not what I was looking for. Or I think I can see where you're going, but remember that what we are talking about here today is whatever. Sometimes you'll just say, okay, thank you for responding. Does anybody else have a different answer? And that gives an opportunity for the students in the room who are just kind of chafing, thinking, well, that's the wrong answer, to give their answer. And then that can lead into more of a classroom discussion. If it's partly wrong, so again, here we have our misconceptions or outdated information, that's when I like to say, well, here are the studies that I'm aware of. I know that in this study they showed blah, 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 or something that makes it more data-based. It isn't just, well, I think you're wrong and I'm the teacher, so I must be right, but instead helping them see how you got to your answer. And again, this gets back at that. Sometimes it's not completely wrong, and it's a good opportunity to really talk through that misconception. Sometimes you don't really know exactly what a student is saying. So you will ask a question and they will say back something very unexpected, and you really won't know exactly what they mean by that. So then I will say, how do you mean? Or what do you mean? Or I like the examples given here. Help me understand how you got to that answer. Or give me an example of what you mean. And then sometimes as they explain it more fully, that gives you an opportunity to see their thought process a little bit and to either say, oh, I see what you're saying, and then to explain to the class where that student is coming from, or to say, oh, I see what you're saying. Here's where I think you and I are heading in different directions, and then talk about what they may be saying that you perceive as being incorrect. Occasionally, you're going to get someone who really, really believes that they're right. This is absolutely what is always done at the vet clinic that they've worked at for years, or this is what they learned elsewhere in their training, or things of that nature. So there are a couple of things you can do, and how you handle them depends on how much time you have, how argumentative the person is, how open that person is to having a discussion. So if the person is being very argumentative, or if you really just don't have time to address this, you can just say something that makes it clear that we are disagreeing, but we are not going to take the time to discuss this right now. You're happy to discuss it with anyone who wants to talk about it later, and of course very happy to talk to the individual who strongly believes this other point of view. But right now, in the interest of time, for the sake of the rest of the class, we're going to move on. Hopefully they will respond to that courteous way of you telling them we are not going to have this argument right now. The other thing you can do if you have time is to turn it into a class discussion. And again, this kind of depends on how fruitful you think that kind of discussion might be. But if there is time to talk about it, it might be a good time to say, okay, so apparently we're at a crossroads here. I believe this sheet of paper is red, and Susan believes this sheet of paper is blue. So how many people in the room think it's red, and how many people think it's blue? Okay, let's get all the blues on one side of the room and all the reds on the other side of the room, and you come up with your talking points. You know, there's lots of ways you could structure it to turn it into a great class discussion about whatever the topic is. But again, that depends on the time that you have and who you're arguing with, and sometimes even the size of the class and things of that nature. And then finally, sometimes you're going to get an answer that just doesn't make sense to you, but you don't really want to say it's wrong because you don't know for sure. And this is a beautiful opportunity to model how you say, I don't know, which of course, as veterinarians, they're going to have to say many times. Clients come up with interesting ideas, interesting thoughts, not all of which are incorrect, oftentimes based on something that they've learned in human medicine. And this is a really good opportunity for them to see how you as a professional model saying, you know, I've never thought about that before, and I would really like an opportunity to go look that up. So why don't we for right now just put that on the back burner? I'm going to go look it up, and we'll talk about it next time we're in class, or whatever that might be. A really good opportunity for you to model the fact that you don't know as a positive thing for that relationship, and to help answer that question later on. If you have any questions or comments about this teaching tip, please let me know. I'm Dr. Peggy Root, and my email address is rootk001@umn.edu.